Good evening. I'm Bob Schwartz from the Gay Liberation Network. My guest this evening is Tanya Unzueta of Radio Arte. As you may have noted from the introduction, we are going to be discussing lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual people, and immigrant rights. Please give us about 10 minutes to get into our topic. Then we will have some announcements, and after that we will field any phone calls that you might have. It's been my impression that that LGBT people of color tend to be somewhat invisible, and that this might even be truer of immigrants who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. So what I'd like to do is to begin the discussion by asking Tanya what issues she would identify that are peculiar to LGBT immigrants.
Right. Well, the way I see it is that as with every identity, there's a lot of intersections, right? And in terms of the way that I see LGBTQ and rights and immigrant rights is kind of in three ways. I think that there are immigrants who are part of the LGBTQ community. There are things that are happening to both communities that are really important to address and very unfair. And there are things that are happening both with the LGBT community and the immigrant community that are very unjust and very unfair. And I think that just as human beings and as communities, we need to care about these things that are happening. And so, in terms of being an LGBTQ immigrant, I think people who are LGBTQ and immigrants go through maybe some of the everyday things, such as coming out. And what does it mean to come out when your family thinks that being gay means that you're Americanized, for example? What does it mean to be kicked out of your home when your family outside of your mom and dad and your immediate family are, in Mexico, for example, and you have no other family ties in the U.S.? What does it mean to not have any support from your parents, as often happens with LGBTQ youth, when you're going to school, for example, and you're also undocumented, and that also means that you have no access to federal money for scholarships, or about 80% of the scholarships that are out there. And so, I think that there's like a lot of everyday things that both LGBTQ people and immigrants go through. And then there's very drastic examples of what it means to be a queer immigrant. About 2 years ago, there was the case of Victoria Arellano, for example. Victoria Arellano was a transgender immigrant, undocumented immigrant, who was detained by ICE, by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. She was HIV positive, and she was put in one of the immigration detention centers. And she was one of 3 people who died under detention by immigration because they denied her HIV medication. And of course, there's all sorts of other issues, right? She was put in a male prison because her gender assigned at birth was male. But, it also fits into this larger thing about what is happening to immigrants within the immigrant detention centers. And lately, one of the latest cases that has been talked about is this case of Shirley Tan. Shirley Tan, who's a Filipina undocumented immigrant who is now in process of deportation, even though she has her partner who is a citizen and has been with and has children, etc. And so, yeah, just some of the things that coincide, I think, when you have both identities.
What about partners of gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual citizens, or people who are here in a documented way, but their partner might be somebody living in another land, say in Mexico? What about bringing them here and having a relationship here? Right. I mean, if you're heterosexual, that isn't so much of a problem, is it?
Right. I mean, there are laws. The immigration law in the U.S. is based around family, right? And the federal government's definition of family is of that of a man and a woman, right? And so, of course, it would be easier to bring your partner if you were a heterosexual couple. I do have to say, though, that I think that, like, unfortunately, like in terms of immigration, a lot of the immigration issues is not around bringing people into the country, but what do you do with the people who are already here? Because oftentimes the people, for example, if I'm someone who's a citizen who's trying to bring my partner into my country, those are not as many cases as the people who are here, who are undocumented already, and who are in the United States. And so I think that that's a complicated thing too, right? Because, for example, we have the United Families Act, right, which would define a partnership as a partnership with, regardless of whether it's a same-sex couple or a heterosexual couple, when it comes to immigration. And that would help, for example, people who are trying to bring in their partners from outside of the country, but it doesn't really do much for people who are here undocumented already. Same as being married doesn't really do much when a person is undocumented and heterosexual. There's a lot of people who are heterosexual, who are married, who have children, who have been detained by the police, for example, and are in process of deportation. And so it's kind of like, yes, it would help a couple of people, but the problem is much larger than that. Like, I think that we need to do a whole revision of the immigration system.
One of the things that bothers me, and I'll put it this way, is that if I am a business person, a businessman, I can take my manufacturing or whatever my business might be to Mexico or any other place, and I can produce the product, sell it here in the United States or any place, and that's fine. I mean, that's considered to be, doing business. But then when people come across the border who don't have the proper documentation, they are demonized by being defined as illegal.
Right.
Now, why is it that a business can go someplace and produce and make profit, but a worker coming into the United States from another place, let's say Mexico, because that's where a lot of people are coming from, then they're considered illegal. I think that there's a basic problem with that.
Right, and I would completely agree. I mean, what's interesting to me about people saying so much about the border is that what they don't realize is that the border is already permeable, right? The border, economic stuff, factories travel across, the money travels across borders very, very easily, but workers do not.
Yeah.
And so, I think that there's an interest in having workers not have access to documentation here in the United States. It's much cheaper to hire an undocumented worker than it is to hire a citizen. There are factories that, when their workforce is getting a certain amount of years working there, when they're starting to gain benefits, they'll call immigration and have them all deported, just so that they can start over with a new immigration force. And I think that, like, that's part of what is wrong, I think, with the way that we're looking at the immigration debate. I don't think that it's an issue of who's taking away whose jobs, but it's like who is controlling what jobs are available to people and how much people are getting paid, right? And, like, there's always this issue of, like, is it the fault of the immigrant worker who's taking a cheaper job, or is it the fault of the employer who's giving a cheaper job to the immigrant worker?
Yeah, that's certainly one aspect of it. I'm struck by the fact that so many of the people who talk about illegal immigrants and the people who report on the supposed problem of illegals, people like Lou Dobbs, who's in these constant rants about the illegals taking away American jobs and so forth, And you mentioned that border. It's a historical fact that the land into which a lot of people are coming today from Mexico was once part of Mexico and was stolen from the Mexican people by the United States government in the 1840s. I mean, this should be a beginning fact, it seems to me, for any discussion about workers coming into the United States from Mexico who are being defined as illegal.
Right, right. And I think that, and it can go so much beyond that too, because obviously immigration isn't just a Mexican issue, right? There's a lot of people here from a lot of other countries. In the United States, 1 out of 5 people of Korean descent are undocumented, and 1 out of 3 people of African descent are undocumented. And so those are things that we don't often see, because we assume that people who are Asian came here with a visa, or people who are black are just African American, right?
That's right.
And
That's
so,
right.
and which brings up, I think, the issue of race a lot, because the way that we have been looking at the issue of immigration is as a Mexican thing, right? And so Mexicans are undesirable and poor, and we don't want them in this country. And so we also forget that immigration is a global phenomenon, that, it's not just people coming from Mexico, it's people coming from all parts of Latin America, of Africa, of Europe. And so what does that mean about the economic situation of the world also that we're in?
Well, let's take a minute to do these announcements that I mentioned, and then following that, if people have phone calls, we will try to respond to them. The first announcement that I would like to call to your attention, and information about which is now on your screen, is the day of decision. The California Supreme Court, sometime prior to June 3rd, will be making a decision on the infamous Proposition 8, which was passed by a slim majority of voters in California last November, prohibiting the same-sex marriage that the California Supreme Court had several months earlier authorized. So the court is being asked to rule on the legitimacy of that Proposition 8, prohibiting so-called gay marriage. And Gay Liberation Network and Join the Impact are joining to call for a protest or a celebration at 7 p.m. in front of the Center on Halsted, which is located at Halsted in Waveland on Chicago's near north side. That will be, we don't know what day that's going to be, but it will be shortly after the decision is announced by the California Supreme Court. So check www.dayofdecision.org or gayliberationNetwork.net for information as to when that protest will occur. This year's International Day Against Homophobia, Idaho, will occur at the Polish Consulate, 2 p.m. Sunday, May 17th, at 1530 North Lakeshore Drive. 2 p.m. Sunday, May 17th, 1530 North Lakeshore Drive. The Polish government has been outspoken in its opposition to gay rights, particularly the president of Poland, and we are sort of highlighting the oppression going on in Poland, but there are many other places in Africa and in Russia, not to mention here in the United States, where there are problems with LGBT people enjoying full civil rights. So please make a note of that date, Sunday, May 17th at 2 p.m. at the Polish Consulate. We're talking about immigrant rights here today, and on May 1st, there will be a march for immigrant rights. 10 a.m. Friday, May 1st, Union Park at Ashland and Lake Street. The Gay Liberation Network has participated with a number of Latino gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender organizations in the past, and we will do so again this year, May 1st, 10 a.m. at Union Park, Ashland, and Lake. And there you see a part of the huge crowd that was out there. I believe that was last year, and we were somewhere there in the midst of that very large crowd. We take the position that in order to ask other people for their solidarity in our struggle for equal rights, that we have to give support to people like immigrants, like African Americans, women, workers, and others in their struggles. We have a caller. Caller, you're on CAN TV.
I hope you allow me to finish my comment. Illegal alien, they cause problems to our economy in terms of our public school system and in terms of our healthcare system. There should be a path to citizenship. Now, I don't think that we should have no amnesty. What do you say to the person who may have stood in line 5 and 10 years and did it the right way? So these people that's not here the right way, they should have to go back home and apply for citizens the right way like everybody else did.
And I think that something that isn't really known by a lot of people is that it's really hard to come here to the United States legally, and two, it's really easy to become undocumented. If you are someone who has high qualifications, right? Meaning maybe you speak a couple of languages, you have a desirable skill such as technology, etc. It takes about 6 years to get here. If you don't have any of that, it takes about 9 to 15 years to come here to the United States legally. And so, if you're someone who's separated from your children, I think that would be very hard to do, to wait for 15 years. And then the other thing is that a lot of people come here with a variety of visas, and it's really, really easy to not, turn in that paper that, you're switching statuses, for example, from being the wife of a student to being a student, and often that means that you become undocumented without even really knowing it. The other thing is that there's a lot of myths out there about the contributions or lack of contributions of immigrants. It is a fact that there are about $3 billion in the Social Security Administration that belong to undocumented immigrants who pay taxes but do not get public services in return. And so I think that the idea that undocumented immigrants take away resources is very skewed and actually kind of uninformed. And I wanted to actually make 2 more points, if you'll allow me. One, I think that something that we have in common as, well, of course, there are gay people within the LGBT community and the other way around. But the other thing that these 2 communities have in common is that we are treated as second-class citizens. We don't have access to full rights that everyone else does who is living with us. And I really think that both the LGBT community and the undocumented community getting more rights would mean a better economy for a couple of reasons. I mean, the marriage industry, for example, right, around same-sex couples, that will create an enormous amount of income for a lot of industries. But undocumented immigrants are willing to pay fines, for example, up to $3,000 per person that would allow them to become citizens or become residents. And, if they were just given the opportunity to become so. And so imagine what it means to have $3,000 from 12 million people in the United States at a time. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that regardless of what you think about the law, slavery used to be legal. And I hate bringing that up because I don't want it to be this used to happen to you. But slavery used to be legal, and it was a matter of people fighting against the law that was unfair for them to be able to have access to this pursuit of happiness, right? And so I think that it's something very similar where the law says that corporations and money can travel but workers cannot. Right. And where is the fairness in that?
Right. I'm sure that you're aware, Tanya, of the DREAM Act, mm-hmm. And that stands for Development, Relief, and Education for Alien Minors. And it requires that the so-called alien minor be a high school graduate and that he or she be enrolled in college or in military service to earn citizenship. What's your take on that?
My take is that it's a very complicated issue. I think that as someone who I was one of the first kind of like spokespeople for the Dream Act when it was called the CARE Act in 1997, or 2001. I'm sorry, 2001. And so like I think that there's a lot of young people who are undocumented out there who like really want this to happen, and I think that it's one of the few options that we have out there. So I would support it with a huge emphasis on the fact that the military component is really messed up. I mean, people don't have access to scholarships, for example. People are poor and would have to go to the military. And just, I mean, being part of the gay community also means that you don't have that option. And so there's a lot of stuff that's messed up. But I really think that our job as community is to continue to advocate against recruitment, for example, to continue to advocate against the military being in schools, and not be against something that does give a chance to undocumented immigrants. I mean, my sister always says, like, recruiters are still recruiting people. The only difference is that students don't have access to education.
Yeah, I think it's a major problem. Speaking as someone in the Gay Liberation Network who has worked to counter the recruitment going on in the Chicago public school system by the military. The Chicago schools are the most militarized in the United States, and it's troubling that this is an option that many see, particularly those who don't have access to higher education.
Right.
All right, let's review our announcements. Idaho, the International Day Against Homophobia, protest anti-gay hate across the globe. This year's focus is Poland, but as I mentioned before, we are mindful of problems in many other places, including in the United States. Sunday, May 17th, 2 p.m. at the Polish Consulate at 1530 North Lakeshore Drive. The Immigrant Rights March on May 1st. Gay Liberation Network will again be participating in this important activity, demanding rights for immigrants, and most immigrants are workers, and so those two identities are linked. 10 a.m. Friday, May 1st at Union Park at Ashland and Lake. The next GLN meeting is 7 p.m. Wednesday, April 1st at the Gerberhardt Library, 1127 West Granville. Please join us there and become involved in our work. Next GLN show. Okay, we didn't get that date. There is the name of the group and the web page, so please please go there if you want more information. I want to thank our guest today, Tanya, and we'll see you next month.
And hope to see you on May 1st.
And we'll see you on May 1st.